Hi, everyone. This is Gloria Lara, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, known as LEDA for short. Thank you so much for watching us. Really excited to be here with you. And I wanted to let you know that we are changing our format a little bit now and in the future. Before, when we had them every Wednesday, now we will be having them the first and the third Wednesdays of each month. Also, stay tuned because we will be turning these all into podcasts. So if you wanted to play another one and listen to it again, or forward it to your friends and neighbors and relatives, sometimes podcasts are a lot easier to listen to rather than sitting down in front of a computer screen. So that will be available to you shortly. And thirdly, we are actually changing it from community conversations to conversations with visionaries and allies. My previous guests have all been visionaries, have been focusing on how can we help change different parts of the world, different parts of our community, different parts of our country, addressing the issues of racial inequity. But realizing that we have a lot of allies, people with privilege, whether they're white or whether they're people of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, who also have privilege. Lots of times, there are people who are both visionaries and allies. They have a vision for the future and how to help our communities adjust and learn about implicit bias and racism and how to get better at addressing those, and allies, which is they help show us ways of how we can do this to help clear the way. So my guest today is Mayor Nathan Bocks, the mayor of Holland, Michigan, and he is both a visionary and an ally. So let me bring him on. Hi, Nathan. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Gloria. It's good to see you again.
Yes, and let me give people a little bit of a bio for Nathan. He moved to Holland to attend Hope College, where he met his wife, Elizabeth. He also is an attorney graduating from Marquette University Law School in Milwaukee and has a law practice based here in Holland. But what's interesting about Nathan is he served over the last 20 years on 15 different community boards and commissions. He's active in his church, and he's been involved in leadership development and training in Holland for many years. There's a couple of other areas that he's involved in besides being mayor, and we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. So Nathan, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up, and what were those influences?
Sure. I grew up a lot of different places. I was born actually in Muskegon, lived there for a few months, and then we moved up into the Upper Peninsula. So I've got a little bit of Yooper blood in me as well. At 3 years old, moved to Grand Haven. At 8 years old, moved to Port Colborne, Ontario. So I lived in Canada for a couple of years with dual citizenship. And then when I was 9, moved to Mount Pleasant. And that's really the place, before I came to Holland, the place that I called home. I graduated from high school there in Mount Pleasant before going to the University of Michigan for just a semester and then transferred to Hope. And I've got, even though I didn't grow up here in Holland, I've always had strong ties here. My parents grew up here. My grandparents grew up here. I can actually trace my descendants in Holland to folks who came to Holland just after Vinralty did. I can't trace myself all the way back to the Southerner, but I can trace my lineage back to a boat called the Albatross that came over at about 1849, 1850.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, but the name also is quite interesting.
Yeah, I often say to people, my family was tricked into coming here.
Right.
The colony was not doing well, and Vinralty wrote letters back to the Netherlands saying, it's great here, you've got to come. And so my family ended up being one of the ones that came, and my great-great-great-grandfather and his sons made the pillars on the Pillar Church. So I can drive by and see that my family's handiwork every single day.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. So people would look at you and say, well, here's, this, white dude grew up in Holland or is from Holland, whose family's from Holland, and can trace his lineage back. But when we talked earlier, you shared with me a little bit about your parents, because I asked, how did you really become interested in equity and inclusion? And you talked about your parents. Can you share with us a little bit about what they instilled in you?
Definitely. I moved around a lot. We moved around a lot because my parents were educators. My dad was a high school principal, a superintendent of schools, and then taught educational administration, ending up at Central Michigan University. And my dad and my mother as well were always interested in equity and inclusion and making sure people were involved. My dad was famous when he was in Menominee for letting kids out of school so that they could march in civil rights rallies. He got a lot of heat for a lot of things. One of the things that he told me, he died a few years ago, and on his deathbed, one of the things he told me that he was the most proud of his entire life was before he ended up coming to Grand Haven to be the superintendent of schools, they had actually been doing minstrel shows in the high school gym. The school wasn't doing it, but the school was renting out the gym to a group that was doing minstrel shows. And he said there was absolutely no way that that was ever going to continue on his watch. And before he was actually officially installed as the superintendent of schools, he got that program and that process to stop. And for the rest of his life, he did that in 1969, 1970. He died in 2016, and on his deathbed, he said that was that was the proudest moment of his life, is that he had the opportunity to be able to do that. When we were in Mount Pleasant, he was on the state board of the Michigan Special Olympics. He was also a member of the Urban League in Muskegon, and he was one of those guys that wanted to make sure that people were included as much as possible, even in the little things that he did. He was incredibly good at walking into a room and figuring out who in that room needed him the most. Who was it that was the most on the outside? Who was it that was on the edges, on the fringes, and the corners? And he saw himself as a person who had a lot of privilege because he tended to be, a leader in the community. And he used that to pull people into the circle. Even to the extent, and I've told this story at city council meetings, where when we were visiting my son's kindergarten class for parent and grandparent day, I was sitting next to my son, and rather than sitting next to my son, my dad went and found a little girl who didn't have a parent or a grandparent there and sat next to her. And when I looked at him and kind of questioned him about it, he said, she needs me to be her grandpa today. And he did that because he wanted to make sure as many people could be included as possible.
And that's a wonderful, those are some wonderful memories of your father. And it sort of gives us an idea as to, one of the things that we talk about in DE&I education training is don't just look at the surface, but go beyond the surface to see what that person is really like. And that's, an implicit bias where, I could look at you going down the street and say, I'm not going to talk to him because he doesn't look like he really would give me the time of day, for example. Mm-hmm. And that's that implicit bias. But you mentioned something that your mom used to tell you about privilege. Can you?
Sure. I've had a great life. I had a great upbringing. I got to go to University of Michigan and Hope College. Landed on my feet with my own law practice. I'm the mayor of the best town in the world. My mom's still alive, still lives here in Holland, and she often reminds me, she says, you may think that you hit a home run in life, but you need to remember that you were born on third base and your father and I dragged you halfway to home plate. You were born with so much privilege and so many steps ahead of other folks. And you can never forget that fact. You can never forget that, yes, you are in a great place, but you didn't get there all by yourself. You were born into a lot of it, and you had a whole lot of people that were helping you along the way. And I keep that as much as I can in the front of mind, that I didn't get here on my own, and that I had a whole lot of advantages and still have a whole lot of advantages that other folks don't have. And with that privilege comes responsibility. I need to make sure that I'm helping as many people along in that process as I can. My mom's, as I said, still lives in town. She's 90 years old. She's sharp as a tack. She will not ever let me forget it for the rest of her life.
And, my daughter, who just stepped out of the house for a few minutes, same way, she'll roll her eyes, and moms are like that.
She is. She is my rock. She's my biggest supporter, but she's also my biggest critic. And because she's a very honest critic, she knows me very well. She won't let me get away with anything, which is really good.
Yeah, no, she sounds like an amazing person as well. And so let's talk a little bit about your early days after you started your law practice. You said, you decided to stay in Holland after law school. But you mentioned earlier in our conversation that you decided you wanted to be mayor of Holland. Why?
I did. I started getting involved in some nonprofit work. I started volunteering. I can trace my start of heading into being mayor of Holland, Michigan, all the way back to working on a Habitat for Humanity build that Christ Memorial Church was doing. I volunteered with some buddies. We were in our 20s. We liked to swing hammers. And while I was on the build, the executive director of Habitat found out that there was a real estate attorney that was there working. And he said, we need somebody to come in and help us with our legal work. So I started doing pro bono work for Lakeshore Habitat for Humanity. Next thing I knew, I was on the board. Right after that, I was the chair of the board. And there was a program in Holland called, at the time, Leadership Holland. It's now West Coast Leadership. It's a great program of the West Coast Chamber of Commerce. And it's a year-long leadership development program that's designed to introduce people who are new to the community or up-and-coming leaders in the community to different aspects of the community over the course of the year. And then at the end, finding a place where they can plug into the community and having them make a commitment to do something in the community. And that may be as simple as saying, I'm going to read to kids, or I'm going to volunteer with Kids Hope, or I'm going to go and I'm going to become a member of a board of directors of a nonprofit organization, or I'm going to volunteer on a Habitat build. Well, when each of us were walking up to the board and putting our sticky note with what our pledge was to the city of Holland in May of 1999, 21 years ago, I walked up to the board and put my sticky on the board that said, I'm going to be the mayor of Holland. I knew at the time that I was not prepared yet to be the mayor. I had a young family and a young law practice. I wasn't ready for it. And over the course of the next 20 years, it wasn't a direct line goal, but it was one of those things that was kind of always in the back of my mind. I love this community so much, and I've loved it since the first day I was here, that I want to do everything that I can for the people of Holland. And this is such an incredible place with incredible people. Who wouldn't want to be the mayor of this city?
Wow, that's an amazing story of how to set a goal and then move towards it. I mean, because it's a long-term goal, and things don't happen overnight, as we all know. Sometimes we wish they happened overnight, but most of the time they don't. So let's talk a little bit about what Holland is known for, tulip time. And, I heard about Holland a long time ago, living on the other side of the state because of tulip time.
That was one of my stops along the way on my route to be mayor of Holland. When I had my first law office downtown, it was above Butch's Dry Dock, the old Secchity store, third floor. My first year as a young attorney, during the week of tulip time, I could not get a client to come into my office for an appointment to save my life. Nobody wanted to come in and try to find a way to park downtown. So I spent the week looking out the window, watching the parades go by. And I said, I need to get involved. And so I volunteered to be a step-on tour guide. And I got on the motor coaches. During the week of tulip time, I'd give 3-hour tours of the city of Holland. And this was already back almost 30 years ago that I did that. Even when I moved my office away from downtown and I didn't have to worry so much about scheduling appointments during the week, I kept on volunteering during the week of tulip time. And I knew I wanted to be more and more involved. And I had actually, when I was in college at Hope, I sold wooden shoes at the Wooden Shoe Factory. So I've been involved with the Tulip Time Festival all the way back into 1986 or so. I lobbied actively to get on the board of directors of Tulip Time. Nobody was interested in having me be on the board of directors of Tulip Time until Tulip Time started to have a little bit of trouble a few years back. It started to go into decline. They changed executive directors. That's when Gwen Alwarda was hired on to be the executive director. And at the same time Gwen came on as executive director, they were running out of people who were willing to be on the board. And so they finally asked this young tour guide to be on the board as well. And over the course of my 6 years on the Tulip Time board, I went on to become the chair of the board. And Gwen and her team did an amazing job of bringing the Tulip Time Festival really into the 20th century, and making it what we used to talk about is it's not your grandmother's Tulip Time anymore. It's a festival that not only reflects the histories and the traditions of the community and celebrates the tulips, but it's also more and more every year a festival that not only talks about who we were, but talks about who we are and reflects who the community of Holland is and who it is that we aspire to be. There is a lot more diversity within Tulip Time. I haven't talked about my kids at all, but I've got two naturally born sons, and then we adopted a little girl from South Korea. She's no longer a little girl; she's a sophomore at Michigan State. But while she was in high school, she was a Dutch dancer. And so she would put on her Dutch dance costume and be a Dutch dancer the same way that her mother did and her aunts do and her grandmother did as well. To be part of this community, where else in the world can a little Korean girl be a Dutch dancer in wooden shoes on one day and wear her traditional hanbok among the tulips on another?
And that took away a little bit of my next question, which was,
sorry about that.
How have you seen the diversity of Tulip Time change over the years? And that's amazing, because when I first moved to the west side of the state, it's like, wow, you've got all these Latino kids in the Tulip Time Festival. I go, that's interesting, because that's sort of like it changed my image of Holland. Started changing my image of Holland and of Tulip Time, saying, you know what, everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
And then my husband and I went to a few years ago to Tulip Time. I think during the Saturday parade, we would see all these buses with tourists from everywhere, particularly China and other countries as well. Can you talk? I know this isn't the Tulip Time commercial, but you're the mayor of Holland, and I was just watching a video on, believe it or not, on seeds, because I'm planting my garden for next year. And this particular seed company had this video about tulips and talked about the history. And then it says, and then it showed a picture of Holland with the windmill and the Tulip Time. And it said, two cities in the country, Holland, Michigan, and this other city. So that's what we're known for. So talk a little bit about the image of Holland across the country and also outside the country.
Sure. One of the great things about being a tour guide is, for years, I was able to see the festival through the eyes of people who didn't live here. I think sometimes when you live in a community, you become so accustomed to things that you just don't see it anymore. And on every single tour that I did, and I've done dozens of them with people from all over the country and all over the world, I would have people say to me, do you realize what an amazing place this is? Do you realize how unusual it is that you can get hundreds of high school students to come out and perform in costume and in wooden shoes? Do you understand that that the city is clean and it's beautiful and it's well kept up, and the people are friendly? And so Tulip Time has done a great job over the years of helping promote that image of Holland, Michigan as a place where people would want to come visit and would want to live. I love that slogan, and we get to live here. I like to tell people we live in a place where other people come to vacation. This is where other folks want to come because it is such a special place. And Tulip Time has always been a really big part of that, and has done really well, especially in recent years, of trying to encourage as many different aspects of the community to participate in the festival as well, because we're not just a Dutch community anymore. As you said, there are all kinds of there's all kinds of diversity among the Dutch dancers, and I would point that out to the folks that came in as well. I would say, look down that row of Dutch dancers. You're not going to see all blonde-haired, blue-eyed high school students. You're going to see every race, color, and creed throughout there, because this is a community festival that celebrates the community of Holland, Michigan, as much as it does the tulip and the history of Holland, Michigan.
And, one of the, it's not associated with Tulip Time, but one of the events that generally happens around Tulip Time is Fiesta, which is from the League Latin Americans United for Progress. And same children, I'm assuming, do Fiesta as well as Tulip Time. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the?
Yeah, there was a strong relationship between Fiesta and Tulip Time for many years, and then the city, and I don't know whose idea it was to redo the Civic Center, but over the course of a couple of years, the Civic Center was being redone. I'm being a little facetious there because I was one of the people that was behind that Civic Center project, but we were redoing the Civic Center, and the Civic Center was really a hub of activity for both Fiesta and for Tulip Time. And for several years, neither was able to use that space, and they kind of separated into different locations. When the Civic Center came back online the first year, there were real questions about what's the best way to use it, how can we make sure that we're taking full advantage of it. And Fiesta still stayed on the north side of town, but Fiesta and Tulip Time have been working very well together again to come back together, because Tulip Time and Cinco de Mayo usually overlap. That first weekend of the Tulip Time Festival is the Cinco de Mayo Festival. And so there's been a sharing of carnival activity and carnival revenue. They're working on ways to be able to do projects together. COVID has thrown a little bit of a wrench into that this last year and into next year. But I am very, very hopeful. And I have no reason to believe that Tulip Time and Fiesta are not going to continue to work together and are actually going to be strengthening that relationship in years to come.
You know, and the reason I mention it is many people may not be aware, but I think Holland has a large population of Latinx.
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
Yes, we do.
you know, and they came in to work in the fields, and then they stayed to work in all the different places around town. So let's talk a little bit about you being mayor.
Sure.
So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about the role of mayor of Holland? So my question to you is, do you run the city?
Absolutely not. I'm going to make sure I say that loudly and clearly. Our form of local government is a council manager form of government. And if you've been involved in nonprofit work, it's a very similar to that. There's a board of directors, which is the Holland City Council. There is a chair of the board, which in Holland is the mayor. And then we hire an executive director, which we refer to as the city manager. And City Council has one employee in Holland. That is the city manager, Keith Van Beek. Great city manager, great person to be running the city. And then every other employee in the city of Holland works for Keith. So the only employees that have to listen to City Council members directly is Keith Van Beek, and everybody else listens to Keith. So our job as City Council members and as the mayor is to set policy for the city, and then that policy is implemented by Keith and his staff. Now, the mayor's a little bit more than just a city council member. I have some additional official duties, and then I have some additional ceremonial duties as well. So I end up spending a little more time than city council members do with city business. I think it was designed to be a 10 to 15 hour a week job. For me, it tends to be more like a 15 to 25 hour a week job, depending on the week. And during the height of COVID in the spring, it was a full-time job. I was spending as much time, and actually more time, in City Hall than I was in my law office in March, April, and May of this year.
Great. Yeah, because people might notice you're actually in your law office right now. You're not in your...
I am. I do have an office at City Hall, but it doesn't have all of the great technology that we do here, because frankly, I don't need it there as much as I do. Before COVID, I was using that office to meet with folks, but frankly, right now I'm using it to look at mail and answer phone calls and those kinds of things. The majority of the work at City Hall gets done by our wonderful city staff.
Great. Yes, and they are wonderful. So let me ask you a question which you don't ordinarily get asked. What has been an unexpected joy of being mayor?
This job's definitely not, this year's definitely not been what I thought it was going to be. But as I said a moment ago, one of the unexpected joys for me is getting to know and getting to work with the staff at the City of Holland and the city council members through an incredibly difficult time. While there have been a lot of challenges that have come out of COVID and dealing with that, there are a lot of opportunities that have come as well. One of those has been the opportunity to jump in headfirst in March, April, and May and work with city staff, but then also with other leaders in the community. There are a whole lot more leaders in this community than just the elected officials. There are nonprofit leaders, there are corporate leaders, there are business leaders. There's, places like the Chamber of Commerce, Tulip Time, Lakeshore Advantage, the Community Foundation, our downtown merchants, Windmill Island. And in the very earliest days of the pandemic, we were having Zoom meetings with one another where there was this sea of faces of all different aspects of leadership in the community who were saying to each other, how can we help each other? How can we help each other get through this? How can we help each other be successful with this? We know that our budgets are going to be tighter than they have been in the past. So how can we share resources? How can we make sure that we're not duplicating efforts so that the City of Holland can not only survive through this, but can thrive in the days after? And for me, when I looked, those first few meetings, looked at those sea of faces, I said, you know what? Not only are these great leaders, these are people that I know really well. These are people that I call my friends. And so there's not only great leadership, but there's great friendship and great trust in this community among its leadership as well. And it's that trust and that skill and that leadership of the folks that are really bringing this community together. And I count you among that as well.
Well, thank you. I'm honored that you do so. It is a great community, and I see a lot of people working together and helping each other. So along those lines, what can you share about Holland's reaction after George Floyd's death? And in particular, can you also talk about the Department of Public Safety and, our police officers and how, what they did during that whole time?
Certainly. As you've said, Gloria, and I don't disagree with it at all. I'm an old white guy, but this was an incredibly personal situation for me. As I said, my daughter is Korean, but my niece is African-American. My nephew is African-American. I've got Hispanic grandnieces, grandnephews, and I've got a Vietnamese sister-in-law. I've got a whole lot of diversity right within my own immediate family. And when, parents talk about having to have the talk with their Black sons, I know that my niece has had that talk with her son. I know that my sister has had that talk with her grandson. These are not just faces and names. These are people that are in my own family. And so it was an incredibly difficult time for me personally, but then also within the community. But if you think back to the reaction of the City of Holland and the people in the City of Holland immediately following the killing of George Floyd, there were protests here in Holland. There were marches and rallies here in Holland. But unlike other communities, there was no violence here. There was no property damage here. We had peaceful protests. And that does not just happen by accident. And that just does not happen overnight. That is the result of years and years of hard work by folks on both sides who've said, we want to communicate with one another. We want to work together on these things. Before being mayor, I always knew about the Holland Police Department. I always admired the Holland Police and firefighters, but I didn't really know them well, and I hadn't really kind of seen behind the scenes. Since I've been mayor, I have seen and I have learned that we have one of the most stellar police departments in the country. And in the days immediately following the killing of George Floyd, I received a flood of emails from people saying, what kind of training does the Holland Police Department get? What kinds of things are they doing? What policies are in place? An example of that was the 8 Can't Wait campaign. These are the 8 things that a police department ought to be doing to try to ensure that these kinds of horrible things don't happen again. And so I approached Keith Van Beek, the city manager, and Matt Messer, the police chief, and I said, what are we doing here in Holland? I need to be able to answer these emails. And so then they brought me up to speed on all of the things that the Holland Police Department is doing. And what I learned very quickly is the Holland Police Department had not only been doing those things, but they've been doing those things for years. There wasn't a single thing on the list that anybody gave me that the Holland Police Department was not already actively doing. We have a very well-funded, a very well-trained police force. We even work very hard to make sure that the brain health of our officers is appropriate for the job that they're doing, because they do an incredibly difficult job. And this year especially, not only with George Floyd and not only with the racial unrest, but they've been asked to go above and beyond in an incredibly difficult environment of COVID to do those things. I would hold our police department up against any department anywhere in the country. We're a model for others, and other communities actually look to Holland and what Holland's doing to model their own departments after ours.
Yeah, that's great, Nathan. It's I was at the big march that we had, the Georgia's Peaceful March, and I remember seeing the police department, the police there.
Mm-hmm.
They were there to make certain that the marchers were safe.
Yes.
Making certain that when we were crossing the main roads that, traffic did stop for us and directed traffic, making certain that it was almost like they were like guiding everyone around to make certain that everyone stayed where they were supposed to. We stayed on the sidewalks and the cars didn't, take off unexpectedly. So that was good to see.
Every now and then the chief shares little tidbits of information about officers. Doesn't give us particular names, so there's no identifying thing there. But we as city council members received just a little note from the chief recently that he had received from an officer who's recently come to the department. And the officer said, I trained with another department in another city before coming to Holland. And he said, the feeling here, the attitude among the officers and the attitude within the department is very different than this other community that they were in. He said, I really felt when I was in the other community that the officers were looking to get people, that their idea was, how can we catch people in things? And he said, in Holland, it's very different. Holland's attitude of the officers every single day is, how can we help people? When people can be at the most difficult, the bottom point in their life, the Holland Police Department is saying, how can we help raise you up from this situation that you're in right now? And he said that was such an incredible breath of fresh air to be able to see that in this department. And the chief said that's exactly the goal that they're looking for. They want to make sure that they have officers who are looking to help the people of Holland be the best people that they possibly can be. They're not out to get people. They're not out to catch people and things. They're out to be able to make this community as best it possibly can be and help people along the way in making that happen.
No, that is refreshing to hear. Question about, and maybe this is more a Keith Van Beek question, but what are some practices of inclusion that the city is implementing besides, real inclusion beyond just diversity?
Yeah, we actually have an equity, diversity, and inclusion department here in the city of Holland. We are actively looking within the city to be able to do as much as we possibly can with diversity, equity, inclusion. One big thing that we did this year, the city council did this year, is we passed a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance to make sure that people are protected in their housing and in their employment and in public accommodations, which would be things like restaurants and stores and hotels. There had been a request made just about a year ago. We had about 300 people show up at a city council meeting and ask us to visit the issue of putting together a non-discrimination ordinance to protect additional groups that were not covered under our then current ordinance. And so city council said to Keith Van Beek, the city manager, and to our city attorney, go out, do some research, come back to us with options without recommendations. So that we as council can see what things are possible. What can we be doing in this community? And they came back to us, they gave us some options. And just as that was happening, the pandemic hit, and we ended up having to put things on pause for a little bit because we knew that this was going to be an area of big discussion within the community. We knew that people wanted to participate in this process. And the other thing that council has done this year is made community engagement one of our top priorities. We want to hear from the community, and what's great is we do. I answered, I think, 25 emails this morning from people who have raised questions about things. We went through the spring, and as it got into the summer, we said, we can't put this on pause anymore because it's something that we really need to bring back, and we've got to figure out a way to be able to have people participate in the process, but stay safe as well. So we put together a specific email address where people could email comments to us, and then we also created a process where people could come to city council meetings. And over the course of late June into July and then into August, we had a series of city council meetings where we discussed the possibility of the non-discrimination ordinance, culminating in a meeting in August where we had hundreds of people show up again. We can only accommodate 24 people actually in city council chambers, but we had a line of people around in the parking lot as well. That meeting went until almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I laughed because in some of the comments I saw, they passed that in the middle of the night. I'm like, no, we started the meeting at 6 o'clock in the evening. It just went until 2 o'clock in the morning before we finally got done. And in the end, we actually passed a non-discrimination ordinance that was broader than what was initially asked for the year before, because council saw what was possible and said, we need to do what we can to ensure that the rights of every single person in the city of Holland are protected in the same way. We want everyone to feel welcome here. We want everyone to feel valued here. And we want to celebrate the value of everyone that calls Holland home. And that's more than just acceptance. That's more than just inclusion. That's recognizing that everybody has something positive that they can bring to the table. And we want people to bring those things to the table. And we want to celebrate the fact that they're bringing that to the table, because if people aren't coming to the table, we're missing out on what it is that they have to bring to this community.
That's great. And I assume that it's just going to keep on going, moving forward. So before I ask my final question, I have one second to last question. And that is, you're a white male. And like I said, people might see you down the street, not know who you are, or just say, oh, that's the mayor of Holland. And, oh, yeah, he looks like I would expect the mayor of Holland to look like. Especially when you go out of Holland. And I'm certain that I don't really know if they have meetings of the U.S. Mayors right now because of COVID, but in your meeting people from outside of Holland, you're a white male. How do you go about talking to other white males who might be resistant to equity or inclusion?
And I really try to point out to them that if they are keeping people from the table, or there are barriers that are keeping people from the table, we're missing out on opportunities. One of the things that I often said during the discussions on the non-discrimination ordinance is I said, if you've been to the Pride event that typically takes place in Centennial Park, and if you looked at the Pride event, you say, who had the biggest tent at the Pride event? Herman Miller did. One of our largest employers had the biggest tent supporting LGBTQIA+ rights. Why? Because they know that they need to attract the best and the brightest from across the spectrum. And that talent does not exist in just one in one racial group, in one economic group, in one community. If we want to attract the best and the brightest into our community, we need to make sure that everyone feels welcome. And that means, as I said, is welcoming diversity, welcoming inclusion, and celebrating what they're bringing to our community. We want the very best here. And the very best come from across the spectrum. And so that's what I try to get across to other mayors, to people from other places. I'm always surprised that for our community of 33,500 people, we are recognized worldwide, not only as the place that has the tulips and the windmills and the wooden shoes, but we are a world center for manufacturing, for innovation. People know Holland, Michigan, because good things happen here.
And a lot of that is because of the diversity of people and ideas.
Exactly what that is. Yeah, if we only have one slice participating and contributing to what's going on, we're missing everything else that's around there, and that would be crazy for us to do.
So that sort of leads me into my final question. What is your vision for Holland 20 years from now?
I think about this a lot. I love this town. There's some projects that I would like to see done. There's some development that I would like to see done. There are things that I'd love to see with Tulip Time and with diversity and equity and inclusion. But the biggest thing for me, it boils down to 6 magic words. 6 words that I started using, probably 4, 5, 6 years ago already, because I was so proud of my community. Every time I would go on social media and there was some great thing that had happened in Holland, we'd been named, the best Kurt's Market, the happiest community in town, or in the country, or the second happiest. I guess we were the second happiest. The best place to start a small business. I would always link to those articles, and then I would just put a little tagline on it. And the tagline was, "And I get to live here." And it was a way for me to be able to kind of poke a finger at my friends who didn't live here and say, look at what a great place this is that I get to live. I'm so proud to be here. I'm so proud to be part of this. And I feel so welcome here. When I started to actively run for mayor a couple of years ago, we changed that slogan a little bit from, and I get to live here, from that very personal statement to, and we get to live here. Because my goal for this community is that everybody feels as welcome to be here and as proud to be here and as deeply rooted in this community as I do. That vision of everyone in the community is thinking to themselves, and we get to live here. It's kind of this amazing question at times. You look around at this great place and the great people and the great things that are happening here, and you kind of, pinch yourself a little bit and go, and we get to live here. That's my vision for the community, is that everyone feels as wonderful about this place as I do.
Yeah, and that's a really great way to end our conversation. Thank you, Mayor Nathan Bocks. If you don't mind sticking around for just a couple of minutes afterwards, and we close up. So thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, I am the Executive Director of the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, LEDA. And I just want to mention a couple of things to you, because we do this all ourselves. And so here is our website, ethnicdiversity.org. When you go down our website, there is a pledge to take action against racism. And that is right on our homepage. So you can get on there. We have over 225 people that have signed on so far, and these are people, community leaders, as well as private citizens. And the mayor is also one of those people that have signed on. The other thing I wanted to call to your attention is we have a silent auction. It's the end of the year, and we have a wonderful silent auction with such amazing things to be bid on. It continues through the 19th. So if you get on our website, ethnicdiversity.org, there is a tab right on the front page, an orange tab that you can click on for our silent auction. In the meantime, this is our last broadcast of 2020. We already have people lined up for next year. And please watch our website. And also on our Facebook page, we already are starting to line up our speakers or our guests for next year. So have a wonderful holiday, everyone. Please stay safe. Wear your masks when you're out in public. We have been doing in the Midwest and in Michigan in particular, we've been doing a pretty good job of keeping the incidence of COVID down. And so I'd like to see those infection rates going down and down, which they are right now. So continue to do that even through the holidays. And I know it's hard not being able to spend them the way you traditionally would, but think of how much more wonderful it will be next year when we're finally able to gather together and celebrate. Thank you so much. Take care.